This conference will now be recorded.
Morning. Hello and welcome to our first ever webinar session. Today we'll be focusing on housing and the 2019 legislative landscape. I'm Mike Showett, the Vice Chair of the Nevada Housing Coalition. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, the Nevada Housing Coalition and the Southern section of the Nevada chapter of the American Planning Association. The Nevada Housing Coalition was founded last year with the generous support of Charles Schwab Bank and Wells Fargo. I'd like to thank them as well for their ongoing support of the Nevada Housing Coalition. So as I mentioned, I'm the Vice Chair of Nevada Housing Coalition, and in addition, I also have a role as the Chief Development Officer with Nevada Hand. The Housing Coalition is a relatively new organization whose purpose is to develop strategies and goals that address Nevada's affordable housing shortfall through education, community action, and policy change. We bring together stakeholders, community leaders, and the private sector to collaboratively address the shortfall of affordable housing for working families, seniors on fixed incomes, and other vulnerable populations. Together, we will advance solutions to ensure that every Nevadan has a safe, stable place to call home. We'd like to encourage you to join us in our collaborative effort today. The willingness to be a founding member signals your dedication and commitment to finding affordable housing solutions on a statewide level. To join Nevada Housing Coalition, please visit our website at nvhousingcoalition.org. I'd like to take a moment to introduce our co-sponsor, Lisa Corrado, who wears many hats in our community. Not only is she a board member of for the Nevada Housing Coalition, but she also works with the Nevada chapter of the American Planning Association. Lisa?
Thank you, Mike. As Mike mentioned, I have the pleasure of serving with him on the Nevada Housing Coalition board. I am also the director of the Southern section of the Nevada chapter of the American Planning Association. However, our whole membership, our statewide membership, is on the call today. We're excited to have two statewide organizations together. We are professional planners and planning officials that offer Nevada communities opportunities and resources at all levels of government, the private sector, and nonprofit organizations. We think planners have an important role to play in housing choice and are excited to engage housing and planning practitioners today. We're thrilled to have the opportunity to co-host this event with the Nevada Housing Coalition. So thank you for joining us. Just one last thing I would mention is that both of our organizations as membership organizations strive to offer education and professional development opportunities and training opportunities to share information. And this webinar is a great tool for us to share information. Thank you.
Great. So back to Mike. I am going to be your host for today. We've got three great speakers. Each speaker is going to be given an opportunity to give us their perspective on the legislative landscape with respect to housing. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. I'm going to be recording those questions, and we'll do our best to pose the questions and answer them at the end of each speaker's presentation time. So go ahead and use that chat box if you've got questions. So I'd now like to take the opportunity to introduce our special guests. First, we have Brooke Shipwright, a housing advocacy organizer with the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. Nevada State Senator Julia Ratty from Senate District 13, and Denise Lopez, who is the State Director from Faith in Action, Nevada. Our first speaker is Brooke Shipwright, housing advocacy organizer with the NLIHC, an organization dedicated to educating, organizing, and advocating to ensure decent, affordable housing for everyone. They produce a wealth of data, which Brooke will speak to today, as well as help mobilize hundreds of partner organizations and thousands of individuals to expand the nation's supply of low-income housing, preserve existing affordable housing and housing resources, and keep the issue at the front of the dialogue with our elected leaders. It is a fantastic organization to be involved with, and I'd recommend everyone today to visit their website, nlihc.org, to see how to join and get involved. I can tell you from personal experience, Nevada Hand is a member of the NLIHC, and it's been a great collaboration so far. So now let's turn it to Brooke for an update on the national housing landscape.
Great, thank you, Mike. Good morning, everyone. My name is Brooke Shipwright, like Mike said, and I'm a housing advocacy organizer at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and Nevada is one of the 13 states that I cover. I want to thank each of you again for joining today's webinar, and to the Nevada Housing Coalition for inviting me to be part of it to discuss what's going on at the federal level in relation to affordable housing. I'm going to briefly share about the National Low Income Housing Coalition and what our research says about the need for affordable homes, both nationally and in Nevada. And then I'll move into discussing the national legislative landscape on housing and how you can all get involved. So the National Low Income Housing Coalition, or NLIHC, is a national policy, advocacy, and research nonprofit that focuses on ensuring that people with the lowest incomes have access to decent, affordable homes. We publish research highlighting the need for affordable homes, educate lawmakers and the public, and mobilize our members and supporters across the country to advocate for good housing policy. So our data shows that the lowest income renters have the greatest need for affordable housing, but the least amount of homes available to them. So for example, our most recent GAP report demonstrates that there is a shortage of 7 million homes for the 11 million extremely low income renter families in America. To put it more simply, there are only 37 affordable and available homes for every 100 extremely low-income renter households nationwide. And you'll see on this chart that, again, it represents that ELI households have the greatest shortage. This map shows how this number varies from state to state, and as you'll see, Nevada has the greatest shortage with only 19 affordable and available homes for every 100 ELI renter households. So specifically in Nevada, this chart gives some additional housing statistics from our GAP report, including that 92% of ELI households in Nevada are considered to be cost burdened, or what that means is they're paying more than 30% of their income on rent, and 79% are considered to be severely cost burdened, or are paying more than 50% of their income on rent. Most recently, we released our 30th anniversary edition of the Out of Reach report that we put out each year. This was just released last month. The Out of Reach report documents the significant gap between renters' wages and the cost of rental housing across the U.S. by calculating the housing wage, or how much a household needs to earn per hour in order to afford a modest apartment. The housing wage is calculated nationally as well as in every state, metropolitan area, and county. This year's report shows the national housing wage to be $22.96 for a modest two-bedroom home. It also shows that there's not one county in the United States where a person can afford a two-bedroom apartment working 40 hours a week at a minimum wage job. So in Nevada, a household must earn $18.85 an hour to afford a modest two-bedroom home. And minimum wage earners must work 91 hours a week to afford a two-bedroom apartment and 73 hours a week to afford just a one-bedroom apartment. Both the Out of Reach and GAP reports, as well as other resources that we have, as well as some interactive tools from these reports, can be found on our website at nlihc.org. So now that we have an outline of the need, let's turn to what's happening with housing policy at the federal level. On June 25th, the House approved a 5-bill spending package for fiscal year 2020 that includes robust funding for affordable housing and community development programs at both HUD and USDA that serve low-income communities, as well as several positive amendments. This includes sufficient funding to renew existing housing choice vouchers and project-based rental assistance contracts, as well as increased funding for programs like Section 202, Section 811, the Native American Housing Block Grants, Homeless Assistant Grants, and other critical programs. Some of the positive amendments that were included and passed with this package include additional funding for, again, Section 202, tenant-based rental assistance, HUD VASH, the Indian Community Development Block Grant Program, the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, and others. So I just want to stop and say a big thanks to everyone who participated in ours and others' calls to actions about this, because there were some harmful amendments that were being floated around, and because of your advocacy efforts, these did not end up making it into the final vote. So before the spending bill can be enacted, Congress and the White House must reach a bipartisan agreement to lift the low spending caps on defense and domestic funding, which is required by law under the Budget Control Act of 2011. If the caps aren't lifted, affordable housing programs may face devastating across-the-board cuts of an estimated 10%. But if an agreement is reached, then additional housing funds may be available. So opposite from the House, we have heard that the Senate would like to pass a budget cap deal prior to passing a spending bill to solidify what the numbers can actually be when negotiating a budget deal. However, an agreement to raise the debt ceiling is also needed this year, and it sounds like legislators are now looking to negotiate this first. This could be combined with a budget caps deal, but we'll know more by the end of the summer whether this is the case or not. So, looking beyond the federal budget, we are seeing several bold housing proposals in Congress and in the 2020 presidential race, and are still expecting more in the near future. We're really excited about this. Many are including bold new funding levels for the National Housing Trust Fund and other programs targeting extremely low-income families. So specifically, there are about 6 bold proposals I want to highlight. So I'm just going to go over those quickly here. The American Housing and Economic Mobility Act was reintroduced by Senator Warren of Massachusetts, and a companion bill in the House was introduced by Representative Richmond of Louisiana. It would provide $445 billion over 10 years to the National Housing Trust Fund and expand opportunities to help families climb the economic ladder. It also includes incentives to remove local zoning barriers to reduce the cost of middle-income housing and provides new investments in tribal and rural housing. Secondly, the Rent Relief Act was reintroduced by Senator Harris of California in April to address the rising costs of rents afflicting low-income households. Companion legislation was introduced in the House by Representatives Davis of Illinois, Gomez of California, and Peters of California. The bill creates a new refundable tax credit for renter households paying more than 30% of their gross household income for the taxable year on rent and utilities. The Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act was reintroduced by Senators Cantwell of Washington, Young of Indiana, Wyden of Oregon, and Isaacson of Georgia. And a companion bill was introduced in the House by Representatives Del Bean of Washington and Marchant of Texas. So this bill includes a 50% expansion of the 9% tax credit. It locks in the 4% credit and includes really important reforms to more deeply target these resources to families who need it most. This includes a 50% basis boost for ELI households and 30% each for rural and tribal communities. There's a bipartisan slate of sponsors in the House and Senate, which is great, but it's not yet clear what avenue this bill will take to get passed. The other 2 that I mentioned do not have any Nevadan co-sponsors yet, but this bill does. Representative Titus of Nevada has signed on as a co-sponsor of this bill. So the other 3 I'd like to mention, the first one is the Ending Homelessness Act was reintroduced by Representative Maxine Waters of California in March and was approved by the House Financial Services Committee shortly after its reintroduction. The proposal would provide over $13 billion over 5 years to fight homelessness and housing shortages through vouchers, the construction of new units, and outreach. The Fair Housing Improvement Act was reintroduced by Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia last month, and a companion bill has been introduced in the House by Representative Peters of California. It would prohibit housing discrimination based on source of income, veteran status, and military status by adding them as protected classes under the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Senator Jackie Rosen from Nevada is currently the only co-sponsor on the Senate side, and there are no Nevadan co-sponsors on the House side as of yet. Finally, the Fair Chance at Housing Act was introduced last week by Senator Kamala Harris and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. This bill would help ensure that justice-involved people have access to federal housing assistance by requiring an individualized review and opportunity to provide mitigating evidence, eliminating one-strike eviction policies, and allow people with criminal records to visit family living in a public housing development. So on the regulatory side, just wanted to briefly mention that in May, HUD published 2 harmful proposed rules you may have heard about. The first would prohibit mixed status immigrant families from living in public and other subsidized housing. The public commenting period for this particular proposed rule just ended last week, and HUD received over 30,000 public comments. This is more than HUD has received for any proposed rule ever. So we're really excited about that and are really grateful to each of you who submitted comments. We're continuing to facilitate a working group on this proposed rule, and we'll be providing updates on what the next steps are, including once the USDA's version of this rule is posted, which is expected to come out in August. The other proposed rule would weaken Obama. The second would weaken Obama-era protections under the Equal Access Rule, which bars federal housing discrimination.
But it is being recorded, so once I get.
The second would weaken Obama-era protections under the Equal Access Rule, which bars federal housing discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity.
Did you want anyone else to watch this?
There's some feedback.
Now, they're talking a lot about federal, but like supposedly later on, they're supposed to be talking about
folks, as you have the presenter.
I mean,
handle.
there's not a lot going
Hi,
on.
Mike.
What is going on?
If you haven't already muted yourself, please do so. Thank you.
Thank you. The second would weaken Obama-era protections under the Equal Access Rule, which bars federal housing discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. Specifically, this rule would allow federally funded shelters to deny people admission on religious grounds or force transgender women to share bathrooms and sleeping quarters with men. So this proposed rule is not yet posted for public comment, and we're not sure when it will be, but we'll be sending out information and helping to generate public comments on this as well once it is. So what can you as advocates do? Really, the best thing is to get in touch with your legislators by writing, emails, phone calls, scheduling visits with them when they're back home in their districts for the August recess, which is coming up. And the 3 things that we encourage you to talk to them about and ask them to do is 1, lift the spending caps and fund affordable housing programs to the highest level possible. The second is to support bold proposals for affordable housing and sign on as co-sponsors. These are the bills that I just went over. And finally, ask them to support legislation blocking the HUD and USDA harmful proposed rules out there. For example, the House budget included language to block these rules, and we are encouraging the Senate to do so as well. So one more way to get involved is by elevating the conversation of affordable housing in the 2020 presidential race and other state and local elections. We recently launched the Our Homes, Our Votes 2020 campaign, which is a great resource for both individuals and organizations, including 501c3s, to get involved. If you go to the website www.ourhomes-ourvotes.org, you can see what each of the presidential candidates are saying about housing and find resources for voter and candidate engagement to use this race to, elevate the conversation of affordable housing at the federal level, as well as in your state and local communities. So I'd encourage you to check out this resource for yourselves, as well as share it with others in your networks. To close things out, I'd like to leave you with some resources we produce at NLIHC that can be helpful in your advocacy work. and advocating for more affordable homes. So a lot of the data I shared today comes from our two major annual reports, which I mentioned, the GAP and Out of Reach. The GAP discusses the shortage of affordable rental units, and Out of Reach discusses the disconnect between working wages and the cost of housing. Both make the case for increased resources for housing assistance programs and can be useful to you in making the case in your own communities. Like I mentioned, each have their own online components which can allow you to look up data at the state and county levels. Our Advocates Guide represents everything we know about low-income housing and advocacy and is a great resource both online, and you can order a physical copy for yourself as well. And then finally, Tenant Talk is published twice a year to connect residents with housing policy issues affecting their lives. We also have a few different types of fact sheets specific to your state, which are can be found on our website under Housing Needs by State. These include a preservation database fact sheet describing affordable units that will be expiring in the coming years. Your state housing profile, which we went over a little bit, looks at the number of affordable homes needed for ELI renters and who ELI renters are. And congressional district profiles, which look at renter statistics for each federal district. Finally, NLIHC is a membership-based organization as well, and many of the things we do is made possible through the financial contributions of our members. So we'd like to encourage you to consider becoming one today at nlihc.org/membership. So before I pass the torch, here's my contact info. Please feel free to reach out anytime, and I'll be happy to answer any questions anyone has at the end.
Thanks, Brooke. This is Mike Showett again. So as a reminder, everybody, if you have questions, please type them into your chat box. And actually, Brooke, I have a comment and a question. So it looks like there's a lot of great policy and legislation that's making its way through the process in DC. The piece that I'm most interested in is the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act. In my mind, this has a really great potential to provide some common sense policy changes to preserve affordable housing, as well as really provide a lot more resources in the production, federal resources to support the production of affordable housing. And in fact, I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to be in DC the day that piece of legislation dropped in the Senate, and met with most of our congressional delegation. And so I'm really happy to see that Representative Titus has signed on to it. And from my discussions with the others, I'm certain that Senator Rosen and Senator Cortez Masto and our other representatives are also going to sign on at some point.
That's great.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. So, you know, I think we all know what we can do as individuals to support these pieces of legislation. We can get on the phone, we can send emails, we can meet with our representatives. What advice do you have for an organization like the Nevada Housing Coalition? What should we be doing as an organization to support some of these efforts in DC?
Sure, that's a great question. So what I would suggest is basically, you know, doing more of the same, but using, you know, as individuals, but using your power as a coalition to really elevate that voice of affordable housing. The one thing I've done, I used to work for another one of our state partners in Pennsylvania, and we would organize, we would kind of be, you know, the leaders of the state to organize the in-district meetings when our members of Congress were back home, and serve as that resource to our members to talk about what's going on at the federal level, prepare them for those meetings and get them organized as we were able to. And then you know, they could jump into that opportunity and share their stories and talk about specifics to, you know, their local experiences, but having that state resource to get those meetings organized and kind of provide that messaging and context to our members was really helpful.
Cool. You know, as an organization, I think it would be really fantastic for us to host an event here in either in Reno or in Las Vegas when Congress is out of session, where we could host our congressional delegation and provide some education on some of this stuff. I think that would be great and something that we should consider doing.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, super. I don't see any questions, so let's move on to our next speaker. Thank you very much, Brooke. That was a great presentation. So our next speaker is Senator Julia Ratti. Senator Julia Ratti has been a longtime champion of affordable housing issues. She chaired the interim committee to study issues regarding affordable housing between the 17 and 19 legislative sessions. And that committee championed 5 major recommendations. In the 2019 session, she chaired the Senate Health and Human Services Committee and served as vice chair of the Senate Revenue and Economic Development Committee. We're proud to have her with us today to discuss housing outcomes from the 2019 legislative session. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Julia. Senator Ratti, are you there? Senator Ratti, are you on mute?
Is that better?
Oh, there you go.
Fantastic. So thank you everybody for having me here. I appreciate it. As Mike mentioned, there was quite a bit of activity on affordable housing in the 2019 session. And as he mentioned, a lot of that started in the 2017 legislative session when we were lucky enough to get an interim committee to study issues around affordable housing. I was happy to chair that committee and was really gratified by all of the engagement and the participation that we got across the state in developing some ideas about how at the state level we could address affordable housing. That work started with regional meetings. So we had a meeting in Southern Nevada hosted by Southern Nevada Strong, had a meeting in Northern Nevada hosted by the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development and the Rural Housing Authority, and gathered ideas, and then we're able to have 4 interim session hearings to kind of go through and vet those ideas, which resulted in a suite of legislation that happened in the legislative session. But because the issue of housing is getting so much attention, there were a number of bills outside that process as well. So what I'd like to do is just quickly take you through some of the bills that made it and a few of them that didn't. I know we don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to go through these relatively quickly, and then if there are specific bills that folks are interested in, we'd be happy to have you put your questions in the comment box, and we'll come back to them. So there were 2 bills that strengthened oversight and made sure that we kept our attention focused on these issues. The first was AB 174, sponsored by the late Assemblyman Tyrone Thompson. What this bill did was it continued the work of a interagency council on homelessness that was established during the Sandoval administration, but was established by the governor and was not in statute. So what AB 174 did was it took that existing interagency council on homelessness and put it in statute so that it will continue going into the future and continue the good work of focusing our state's energy and building coalitions across the state to address the issue of homelessness. So that was important work. AB 476 was sponsored by Assemblywoman Teresa Benitez Thompson, and it brought back the Advisory Committee on Housing that had been eliminated in a prior session to provide some additional oversight to the Nevada Housing Division on the work that we do to increase affordable housing in the state of Nevada. And I think we'll have a broader view of looking at not just affordable housing, but housing strategy generally. It also has a link now to a private activity bond council, which will provide the legislature a little bit more oversight into how our allocation of private activity bonds are used, whether that be in an economic development setting or as it relates to affordable housing. So a bit more legislative oversight and statewide focus on these issues. Two bills that came out of the Interim Committee on Affordable Housing were really just helping us to clean up our data collection, make it a little bit more rational, make it a little bit more accessible to the public. So SB 104 was some cleanup and some changes to the reporting and data that is maintained by the Nevada Housing Division. And then SB 473 came out of a working group specifically to try to get through the muddiness that we always get through when we're talking about affordable housing. Like, what do we really need? And so it took some of the federal definitions and codified them into law, so that extremely low income will be defined the same way that it's defined in federal law. Low income, so extremely low income is 30% of area median income or less. Low income is 60% of area median income or less. And then we start talking now about our workforce housing being between 80 and 120% of area median income. You know, it doesn't seem significant, but this allows us now to link and label new legislation to specific populations that we're trying to target. And I think over the long haul, it'll just make some of these conversations a lot easier and will help us to focus our efforts. Probably the biggest win that came out of the Interim Committee on Affordable Housing is SB 448. What SB 448 does is it establishes a state-level low-income housing tax credit. It's a very efficient program in that it creates $10 million a year for 4 years as a pilot program. And that $10 million is aligned with the existing federal low-income housing tax credit programs that exist in the state already. So we aren't going to have to create a new application process or do a whole bunch of work around that. It will be basically facilitated and have as close as possible to similar rules as the federal low-income housing tax credit. What it really does in that space is what we're finding is with the limits and the caps and the different rules that folks who develop low-income housing using the low-income housing tax credit must follow, they're coming up short in being able to close the gap at the end of the project and make a project pencil. And so what this will do is it will allow us to do about 3, possibly 4 more projects a year by bringing that last dollar that closes that financial gap. Many of you who develop housing know that $10 million would be, not even enough for one housing project. But by being that last gap dollar on some of our low-income housing tax credit programs, what this will do is increase our production of affordable housing or built through low-income housing tax credits by about 60%. It'll get us 3 or 4 more projects per year than what we are currently doing. Right now, the state of Nevada produces about somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 units per year, and we'll be able to bump that number up by conservatively another 600 units. So it doesn't come anywhere near meeting the need, but it is a significant increase in the production that we have currently. And I think a big win for the state of Nevada. The goal here will be able to do that 4 years, really prove it can make a difference and be effective, and hopefully come back to the legislature and look for ongoing investment in affordable housing, which is not something that we've had in the state before. So I'm very excited about that. For all of us who are working specifically on the issue of affordable housing, we know that for every low-income and extremely low-income family or individual that gets one of those subsidized units, they can be life-changing. And so I just know that this money will make a significant difference for many Nevadans across the state. Moving on, the other place that there was quite a bit of attention was around tenant protection. I think this is a very hot topic in the state of Nevada right now, and certainly in northern Nevada, where we're seeing such a significant increase in the price of rental units. I personally sponsored SB 151. And so SB 151, what it did is we're the only state in the nation that has what's known as summary eviction, where the burden is on the tenant to file in court if they want to slow down the eviction process. In every other state in the nation, the landlord is the one that has to file in court if they want to evict a tenant. But in Nevada, if the only reason that you're evicting an individual is because they are late on their rent, then you can do what's known as summary eviction, and it's a very fast process. In a state that has such a high percentage of our renters who are rent burdened, paying more than 30% of their income for affordable housing, what happens is one minor financial tragedy, you have to fix your car, or you have a dental bill that you don't have insurance for, and folks get behind on their rent pretty darn quickly. And so that combination of being lowest in the nation in terms of having affordable housing available and having one of the fastest eviction processes is causing a lot of harm in terms of displacing our lowest income Nevadans, and that then becomes very expensive for the rest of the social services system of how do we then keep people housed and make sure that we're not increasing homelessness and make sure that we don't have kids who are moving from school to school and interrupting their education and all kinds of follow-on social services and education issues. So what SB 151 did was seek to reform the eviction process a bit. We did not eliminate summary eviction, did not tackle that. The summary eviction still exists. But what it does is it extends the time to cure from 5 court days to 7 court days. The Las Vegas Review-Journal did a really nice article that laid out in a graphic form. The real effect of that is basically it increases the time from about 10 actual days to about 15 actual days that a tenant will have to find the money or move out before they will be served a notice of eviction. The second thing that it does is the law was somewhat vague. It said evict within 24 hours, and in some cases we had tenants who were being served eviction notices and told that they had 10 minutes to get out. What happens in those situations is they tend to abandon all their belongings, and again, for extremely low-income and low-income individuals, those belongings are a great part of their assets and their wealth. So now it is will evict 24 hours or later. So that tenant does have at least 24 hours to collect their belongings and move out. We were seeing in the state of Nevada a lot of examples of illegal serving of eviction notices. So terrible stories about eviction notices that were being posted behind locked gates where they couldn't be accessed by tenants or just weren't even being delivered at all. And so now we do require that an eviction notice be delivered either by a process server, or if a property doesn't want to incur that expense, the SB 151 says that if they have an attorney who certifies that their eviction process follows the law, that they can rely on that attorney's certification as well. And then the final piece of SB 151 that was in the original version is that the lease now will follow the sale. So we had too many stories of tenants who were in a property, had a lease, they still had time left on their lease, 6 months, 9 months, whatever. But when the property sold, then that tenant could be evicted within 3 days, which was the current state of the law. And so now, much like many other states, that lease will follow the sale. And so if you purchase a property that has a tenant in it and that tenant has a lease, they will be able to continue to live in that property until that lease expires. Now, if the tenant and the landlord mutually agree to terminate the lease, they can do that. But this will, again, stabilize for a tenant who's living in a property that sells, that has a lease, that lease will follow the sale. Those were the original components of SB 151 as it passed the Senate. Then there was a companion bill, SB 256, that also passed the Senate, and it was really focused more on a broad suite of tenant protection. It did a couple of things. It capped rent at 5%. It then said that rent could not be considered, late fees, it capped late fees at 5%, misspoke there. And then it also said that late fees could not be considered as part of rent. And what we're seeing is, in many cases, significant late fees were being piled on top of late rent, to a point where they were just being used as a tool to push undesirable tenants out of their housing. And the law just says reasonable, and different courts across the state were interpreting differently what reasonable was for late fees. So what SB 256 sought to do was define reasonable as 5% and then not have late fees be considered part of the rent for the purposes of eviction. It also shortens the time to return a cleaning deposit. Right now, landlords have 31 days to return a cleaning deposit. And we know for many low-income people, one of their most significant barriers to getting settled in a new place is having the money to put that cleaning deposit down. And so if you can be evicted in 10 days, but you don't get your deposit back for 31 days, there's a disconnect, again, particularly for low-income and extremely low-income families to be able to find another place. It also had some processes to address where there had been some abuses of landlords who are not returning cleaning deposits, but not giving any documentation or giving the tenant an ability to do a walkthrough to see what they were being charged for in their cleaning deposit, and a couple of other things. What happened in the legislative session is that 256 passed the Senate, but did not pass the Assembly. And so in the reconciliation process that often happens when we have differences of opinion between the Assembly and the Senate, we did pick up two parts of 256 and put it into 151. And so the two things that did pass is that late fees are now capped at 5%. And landlords must allow a tenant to have access to their property within 5 days of eviction to retrieve essential items. So this would be things like medication, baby formula, and again, for our low-income and extremely low-income families, the ability to replace some of those items just doesn't exist in their finances, particularly when they've just faced eviction. And so those are the two things that did pass, again, capping late fees at 5% and allowing tenants to retrieve essential items. And then SB 367 authorizes pet ownership and trust fund projects, all kinds of great data, particularly, again, amongst our low-income and extremely low-income tenants who are also coping with behavioral health challenges that pets have been shown to be a significant part of maintaining good mental health. There's already lots of rules at the federal level that say that folks in subsidized housing should be able to have a pet. Now, landlords are able to put rules around pet ownership, but 367 did pass and said that any projects that are built with Nevada Trust Fund dollars need to have a policy that authorizes pet ownership. Then finally, there was a lot of work done in the interim committee to very much focus on what's the state's role and what's the role of local government. And there were two bills that came out. So I'm going to start with SB 103. SB 103 allows local governments to look at their enterprise funds, their impact fees, and their permitting fees, and to make choices if they would like to reduce or subsidize those fees to support affordable housing, anything that is targeted at 60% AMI or lower. It does put some requirements on the local government that they must do an ordinance to lay out their programs so that they can't just sort of pick winners and losers arbitrarily, but rather have thought through an ordinance to just say who will be receiving these kinds of subsidies. But it does give local governments a tool to help offset for developers the cost of building affordable housing. It could be used in conjunction with other projects out there like low-income housing tax credits, or it could be used very specialized. For example, there's a project in Reno right now that is a 200-person more dormitory-style housing that doesn't qualify for low-income housing tax credits or any other programs, but our local government might want to use it for something like this. So it really does make it up to local governments what they want to do with that. It was enabling and a mandate, so local governments will decide what they want to do with that. And then finally, SB 398. SB 398 got a lot of attention in the legislative session. Basically, what SB 398 does is, as it relates to the Interim Committee on Affordable Housing, we've got very different information from the state's legal counsel and from some of the city attorneys and county legal counsel who are participating in the process. At the state, we were told that local governments already have the authority to do things like inclusionary zoning. Local governments already have planning and zoning is considered a matter of local concern. And so from our Legislative Council Bureau standpoint, they felt like local governments already have that authority. But then we heard from DAs and city attorneys that they did not feel like it was clear. There was lots of conversation from the advocates looking for the opportunity to have conversations about rent control. Personally believe that policies like inclusionary zoning and rent control, if they're going to be considered, should be considered at the local level because they are very market sensitive. And the markets in Winnemucca are very different than the markets in Reno Sparks or Northwest Vegas or anywhere across the state. And so what this bill did is it didn't specifically do inclusionary zoning, it didn't specifically do rent control. What it did was say that local governments have the authority to do what is necessary to maintain a supply of affordable housing. So it clarified in state law that affordable housing is a matter of local concern and that local governments have that authority. It passed out of the Senate, but did not make it out of the Assembly. And so I think it leaves us in this place where there's a lack of clarity about whether, what authority local governments do or do not have when it comes to assuring affordable housing. Now, I know it says inclusionary zoning and rent control on the slide, but I just want to be very clear. It really was anything that local governments might want to do around affordable housing. We had some experiences here in Marshall County where the county commission was putting together a housing trust fund, and there was some struggle to determine whether or not they felt they had the authority to do that. So again, I just thought to clarify, local governments have that as a matter of local concern, but again, didn't get across the finish line, so we'll probably need to discuss this at some level in the next legislative session. So those are the not all, but some of the highlights of the legislative action that took place in our 120-day session. We won't be in session again until February of 2021. So there's lots of opportunities now in this interim to have good conversations about what we should be focusing on in 2021. And I'll stop there and see if there's any questions or clarifications.
Great. Thanks, Senator Ridey. This is Mike Showett again. Again, everybody, if you have a question for the senator, please type it in the chat box. And we'd love to answer a few questions. But in the meantime, Senator, I'm going to ask you a similar question to what I asked Brooke. So we passed all this great legislation. Now what? What should we be doing post-session for two things? In the implementation of this legislation that was passed, what should we be doing? Who should we be talking to? And then what should we be doing to prep for the 2021 session?
It's a great question, Mike. Thanks for asking it. So first of all, I just want to say, as a sitting senator who, decided to try to tackle something like affordable housing, I'm really grateful that there is a housing coalition now. Certainly when I started these conversations back in 2017, there wasn't a housing coalition. So there wasn't, a point place that I could go to help me organize within the state all the people who had interest in housing issues. And that's challenging in a state that has a citizen legislature where we're all part-time legislators and are all trying to do this in addition to, our normal life. And so the fact that there is a coalition now so that any legislator, such as myself, who's interested in working on affordable housing issues has a place that they can go to talk to significant players or a group that is helpful in organizing that conversation is a big deal. So many of you people who are your individual members now stepped up to help, but there wasn't that organized structure. And I think we might have gotten farther in this legislative session if had a broader range of ideas in terms of how to address the issue if we had had more of that kind of infrastructure in place when we started this work. So on the first point, I'm just super excited that there is a coalition. And not just your coalition, but coalitions like we're going to hear from Denise Lopez about, that are working with faith-based coalitions and working with renters and tenants or looking at, all of the stakeholder groups so that it's not just builders and developers and planners in the room, but that we also are talking to the people who are impacted by these policies. is really important. And then I think as much as we can do to keep that list of people who are stakeholders, keep them engaged. I mean, there's no question that in the process of legislation, somebody like me is going to make people angry. There are differences of opinions that happen in a legislative process. And so having a group that can both be advocates but also can be sort of a neutral facilitator when there are very strong differences in points of view about how we should be proceeding to develop more affordable housing stock, I think is really important. You know, we don't want this issue to get caught up in become a partisan issue that it's something that only Democrats do or something that only Republicans do, or that we have very different opinions about how it gets done. And so I think having neutral, nonpartisan folks who bring all sides of the spectrum in to have good conversations about, you know, where we do have differences of opinion, where can we compromise, and where we are all aligned, where let's work together and set aside those differences of opinion is going to be really important. I think we ran up against some conflict in the last legislative session that wasn't necessary, and if there had been some more, you know, less partisan, more outside, broad-based, nonpartisan folks who were supporting some of these policies, we might have had more success. So those would be, and then of course the normal stuff that we talked about before of, you know, having a great register with people who you can activate so that they can come out and testify at hearings or send emails to their legislators, and those sorts of things are important as well.
Great, thank you for that. And most importantly, thank you for your leadership in supporting affordable housing policy, both in the session and outside of the session. You've been a real champion for our cause, and I think we all really appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so to bring it home, we're pleased to welcome Denise Lopez, State Director of Faith in Action Nevada. Denise has a strong background in advocacy, grassroots organizing, and coalition building among multicultural groups, and her work with Faith in Action has helped to create innovative solutions to problems facing urban, suburban, and rural communities. It's my pleasure to welcome Denise. The floor is yours.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. So I want to give you a little bit of background about the organizing and advocacy work that our affiliate Action did, because what the Senator Julia talked about didn't just happen. There was a lot of work that for the past 4 years from advocates pushed some of these pieces of legislation forward in coalition with stakeholders, elected officials, and grassroots leaders. So to give you a little bit of background, so Action spent the past 3-4 years, and they did listening campaigns. They went to weekly motels. They listened to senior citizens, churches, and in the initial stages of the conversations, they started to hear that housing was an issue, specific to affordability of housing. And after months of listening, early in 2016 and 17, our organization started to spring into action and started meeting with elected officials to see what could be done. While at the same time, they started organizing in weekly motels. They were having potlucks to build relationships with people who were directly impacted. They were training those individuals to share their stories. They were also building a coalition with service providers. And again, they continued to meet with elected officials and stakeholders. And after months of conversations with elected officials, stakeholders, and advocates, and no solutions, we started attending city council meetings and commissioner meetings with over 100 people. We knew that this was a path forward, like someone needed to create a solution to this problem. So we started going to the meetings and commenting during the public comment. And in 2017, 18 actually, Action hosted a community tour of weekly hotels that was attended by community leaders, including elected officials and other stakeholders. The tour got very strong press coverage and helped to deepen the relationships with decision makers. And eventually, Action launched the Home Means Nevada campaign, which focused on establishing an affordable housing trust fund in Washoe County that would allocate $5 million in local revenue every year to fund affordable housing development. And knowing that obviously we needed to create other solutions, as it has been mentioned earlier, we have to work at the local, state, and federal level to find solutions. We were using the momentum that we were building from our local conversations, from the trainings that we were doing with our local leaders, to use all the mobilization to go to Carson City in the 2019 legislative session. So in conjunction with the local and state work, we were trying to get sensible legislation to develop more affordable housing and create protections for tenants, because we were hearing that senior citizens were being evicted, that people couldn't afford the weekly hotels anymore, or the weekly motels were being torn down. So if you click on the next slide, the next one. So it took a long time, and we were beating the drum, having constant conversations with elected officials, with different stakeholders, with coalition partners. And we finally, in March of this year, March 26, the Washoe County Commission moved to create a affordable housing trust fund in the Reno Sparks Washoe County. And now we're working to figure out the budget. How much money are we going to be getting for the housing trust fund? So, but all this work that we did at the local level and at the state level, all this was possible through conversations that we had. So we collected over 1,000 pledge cards, and we invited people in the election cycle to talk about housing as their primary issue. So when elected officials or canvassers were knocking their doors, they would say, housing is an issue. We had over 330 faith and community leaders that at the local level went to city council or commissioner meetings. Some of the meetings that we held with commissioners, sometimes you would have 3 people or 70 people at these meetings. At the state level, this legislative session, we were there consistently. We launched a weekly advocacy visit on February 28th. In total, we had 209 advocacy visits talking about housing and along with other economic justice bills. We trained people to share their story and how to testify. We, based on the pace of session, there's 120 days, so things move really, really fast. We developed a rapid response team so that they could show up to hearings. If we got a notice, hey, there's a hearing tomorrow, we would email people and call and say, hey, this is happening, can you show up? And all this, it was through trainings, letting people know, hey, this is what the process looks like, going to city council meetings, commissioner meetings, or state level meetings. This is what it looks like. We're going to show you how to talk to your representatives. And then in addition to all that, we also held events. We had a prayer vigil in Carson City where Senator Julia Ratty was also there with us. We did tons of events to call attention and create awareness about the need for affordable housing. And, you know, Senator Cortez Masto also started working on affordable housing and saying that there was a housing crisis in the state. And we engaged a broad coalition of individuals, those that were directly impacted by housing, grassroots leaders, activists, nonprofit service providers, statewide and local coalitions like the Reno Area Alliance for Homeless. We invited tons of UNR students to do this work because students are also being impacted. The housing affordability with student loans, in addition to other issues, they can't afford housing. For them, it looks a little bit different, and they might not talk about it. They're staying at friends' couches or they're staying with family members, but they don't have a specific place to live on their own. And then obviously working with elected officials, Senator Ratty has been our biggest champion on housing, along with Assemblyman Thompson, who's no longer with us, but he did a lot of work on affordable housing and homelessness as well. And then we relied on the news networks to share our stories, to draw more attention to the housing crisis so that more people would talk about it. So this work was intentional. It took more than 3 years to get the ball rolling, to bring people to the table, to identify individuals who would be willing to share their story, because this process can be intimidating for many people who are in like weekly hotels, who might not have the money, who might be afraid that they're gonna get evicted. So it took a long time to get there, but I think with everyone's support and with the conversations we were having, we were able to make it happen. If you go on to the next slide. And as we were talking about things that can be done to ensure that we keep talking about affordable housing and solutions, we are currently, we launched a listening campaign again in June 22nd. We trained community leaders to facilitate conversations in their community to figure out what issues people are being impacted by. And in those conversations, we're still hearing housing is still an issue that people are seeing, specifically homelessness. Our churches spent all of winter at the winter shelter as volunteers. They had shifts every single night to ensure that they were assisting and helping those that were staying at the shelters. So we would see people there with jobs, but they just couldn't afford rent, or they had other issues. So these conversations that we're having is for that purpose, so that we can identify any other issues that are happening in the community, and we can meet with our elected officials to say, hey, this is what's happening. So you can join us at one of our community conversations that we're having on July 18th. We can also set you up to host a community conversation. We have guides for advocates so that they know how to direct the conversation, who to invite, and any other thing that you might need for those community conversations. The other thing that we're doing, and that has been super helpful in the work that we've done over the past 3-4 years, is meeting with our local, state, and congressional representatives. If they don't hear from us, they don't know what's happening. So in meeting with them, we've been able to help craft pieces of legislation, or we've shared the issues that are happening so that they themselves can do the research to help craft pieces of legislation. So it is critical that we meet with them and let them know what is happening so that they can start solving the crisis that is happening in our communities. And then the biggest piece that took a lot of work was training those that are directly impacted to share their stories. Again, some of them are intimidated. They have never done this in the past. So we work with them to figure out how to share their story so that they're comfortable. And additionally, we train tons of folks to participate in the legislative process, because many of them have never done this before, or even activists have never participated in the electoral process before, or in the legislative process, or have never met with a city council member. So we train them so that they know what to expect at a meeting, what are some of the talking points they need to be sharing, how to share their stories, what recommendations they can offer to the elected officials. So these are some of the things that we can be doing in the interim and working with our elected officials again to find solutions, to craft pieces of legislation, or to just be connected so that they know what's happening. If you go to the next slide. And for resources, feel free to connect with me. I'm happy to train anyone that wants to be trained on any of the specific things that I talked about, how to engage with coalitions, or how to build a coalition, or how to be a part of one, how to train your leaders or those individuals that you guys serve. We're happy to work with you on that. And then it was talked about earlier, but the National Low Income Housing Coalition has a guide on housing. And I think this is a helpful tool if you're trying to figure out what, how to work or how to work on housing. I think the biggest thing is to understand your community and know what the needs are. So talking to residents, real estate agents, developers, different community groups to figure out, okay, this is the issue, engaging with the community and organizing are like some of the biggest pieces, and some of that is here. So use that as a guide to figure out how do you engage in your local community. Again, use us also as a resource if you have any questions. That's all I have.
Great, thank you, Denise. I think grassroots efforts like yours are certainly a key element in moving our affordable housing policies and awareness and issues forward. Thanks for everything that you do. We're going to go back to a couple questions that came through the chat box and see if we can address them. So we've actually got a question for Senator Ratty from Kristen Cooper. And because Senator Ratty's her audio quality is not that great, she chatted back, and I'm not sure if everyone can see it, but she chatted back an answer. So I'm going to read both the question and the answer. Okay, so from Kristen Cooper, currently the tax abatement for affordable housing is only available to organizations receiving Home Investment Partnership Program funds. Tell me about it, Kristen. I know we feel the pain. I know that no one wants to reopen the legislation, but this property tax abatement is an important aspect of our ability to build affordable housing and should be expanded to include other funding sources such as State Housing Trust Fund, low-income housing tax credits, private activity bonds, etc. Any thoughts on how we could accomplish this in the next session? So the answer from Senator Ratty, let's see here. Okay, regarding property tax, my personal view is it will be difficult to increase property tax abatements until we reform the overall property tax system. Nevada's unique system of depreciation and caps means that local governments and schools see property tax significantly constrained. When we can stabilize the property tax income source, then we can consider additional abatements. We didn't get there on property tax this session, so more work to be done here. I tend to agree with Senator Ratty. However, I don't necessarily think we're talking about new property tax abatements. To Krista's point, we have a property tax abatement in place currently. It's just the language, the eligibility for that abatement is too wonky to be useful. This is one of the agenda items that, in my opinion, the Nevada Housing Coalition should be pushing forward, is reforming the way that property tax abatement works so it's more usable by our developer members. Okay, next question. There's a question from Lynn Barnett about efforts to support community land trusts in Nevada. So I have two answers to this. I saw JD, thanks for jumping in there with your response. So there is a community land trust in Northern Nevada that was put in place by the Community Foundation of Western Nevada, and that's in place. And then the second answer is I'm going to punt on this and tell everybody we're going to use this as a pitch, an opportunity to pitch something that we have coming out. So you should be receiving or have received an email from the Nevada Housing Coalition that has a link to a survey. We want to hear from you in terms of what are the areas of education, the affordable housing tools, the issues. What do you want to learn about in future Nevada Housing Coalition events? And the reason I'm talking about this is that Community Land Trust is one of those items that was on the list of tools that we could be using. So I would encourage everybody to find that survey in their email, take the survey so that at our next event, we can address the needs and wants of everybody. All right, let's see, was there one other question? Regional planning, thank you, Lisa. Let's find that question. Sorry, I'm just scrolling back through the chat box to find it. Did I miss it? From Rob Peisel. Does Senator Ratty foresee the legislature looking at the regional planning regulations to strengthen and require the 2 population centers in the state to require them to address affordable housing? So have we talked about having the state mandate the local jurisdictions to implement measures to address the problem? Let's see here. From Senator Ratty, regarding regional planning, I am open to suggestions on language to be more directive and supportive of regional planning affordable housing efforts in the next legislative session. We'll be more successful if a coalition of local governments, planners, builders, and developers come together to agree on solutions. I'm also interested in the successes from other states that we should consider. Great points. I tend to agree with the senator. I do think that mandates for local jurisdictions to implement actions sounds like a little like unfunded mandates, which generally come up against resistance from local jurisdictions, but definitely something that we should consider is putting in place some common sense policy to make sure that our local jurisdictions are doing everything they can do to address the issue. So thank you for that question, Rob. And I think there was, oh yeah, alternate construction methods. Why are alternative building methods like C-crate homes, park models, etc., so hard to get approved? I'm not a plans examiner in the local building department, but I know that there's certainly building code issues, but we being Nevada HAN have done a lot of research around this area. As we look at our own costs, cost is a big barrier to producing housing. And so we've done a lot of research in this area to see if there are ways that we can build to reduce our costs. And what we found so far as an organization is that it's not quite there yet. These alternative methods may save developers some time, but aren't yielding any cost savings. In fact, we're finding that in general, the cost to build modular is still in excess of what it costs us to stick build. And I think that's true here in Nevada. It may not, the opposite may be true in some larger metropolitan areas like San Francisco, but as of today, it's not quite there. That's not to say we shouldn't be pursuing it more and finding ways, looking at every way we can come up with to make our buildings less expensive so we can increase production. So that's my answer. And I don't believe we have any more questions. Let me scroll to the bottom of the chat. Let's see, Miguel Davila from Senator Cortez Masto's office. Not a question, but rather something to clarify on the first section of the conference call. Senator Cortez Masto has co-sponsored the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act and has been a vocal supporter of the legislation. Thank you for that clarification, Miguel. I know she's a supporter of it. I hadn't heard that she'd officially signed on. That's fantastic news. All right, Kristen. It would be great if Nevada Housing Coalition could have the Community Foundation of Western Nevada come speak to the creation of a CLT at one of our meetings. Duly noted, Kristen. Thank you. We will talk about that at our next event. So with no questions, I think I've got a couple of closing comments. First of which is this is a great segue into talking about our next event. So we are in the process of planning a full day in-person housing summit sometime in the fall of this year. We're thinking that the first one will be in Las Vegas, and it'll be an annual event that will alternate between Southern Nevada and Northern Nevada. So stay tuned for that, and there'll be more coming out on it shortly. So thank you for taking the time out of your day to engage with Nevada Housing Coalition and APA Nevada for this important update and conversation. I encourage each and every one of you to get involved and join the Housing Coalition. We'll keep you in the loop on next steps, news, other need-to-know information through the Housing Coalition website, social media channels, and email newsletters. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be sending out a survey as a follow-up to this webinar to find out what housing topics people are interested in learning about at future Housing Coalition events. The next one, which I just spoke about, is our upcoming Housing Summit, which is scheduled for sometime this fall. Thanks for joining us today, and have a great afternoon. Thanks, everybody.